The alien instructor promised torment. She yawned, hijacked the lecture, and asked for bonus work. The Academy of Vorath Prime thrived on rigor and cruelty, where cadets were told that agony was the truest test of power. Their classrooms were battlegrounds, their desks replaced by sparring pits, and their lessons delivered like ultimatums. Into this stepped a lone human named Clara, the first of her kind permitted inside the alien halls. Teachers saw her as fragile, unsuited for their ordeals, and most cadets whispered she would not survive her opening cycle. Clara, however, sat with a steady face, scribbling with a worn-out pen as though she were back in a plain classroom on Earth. Her instructor, a towering reptilian brute with scales flashing beneath the training lights, slammed his talons against the floor and declared that suffering was today's subject. Every cadet stiffened, for they knew he always tested words with action. He pointed at Clara and summoned her forward. Most students sneered, expecting her to collapse, yet she strolled into the pit calmly, straightening her jacket as if facing an ordinary quiz. The clash began with a vicious strike. The air itself shrieked with speed. Clara shifted only slightly, letting the claw rake her shoulder. Gasps swept the chamber. Any other cadet would have dropped. She steadied herself, lifted her chin and smirked. Still upright. The instructor's eyes narrowed as he thundered again. Pain is the lesson. Clara tilted her head, voice teasing and defiant, saying if pain was the lesson, then endurance must be the answer. She jotted notes while blood trickled across her sleeve. Class froze. She was treating combat like homework. Another blow came, harsher and sharper, aimed to floor her within seconds. Clara rolled with the strike, sprang back up, and stood firm. The aliens murmured disbelief. Some shook their heads. Others looked unsettled. To them, silence in pain was alien. Clara chuckled, brushed herself off, and lifted her pen like a baton, declaring she had already written the ending of this so-called lesson. She told them humans did not just suffer pain. They reshaped it, and that was their strength. At first, cadets thought she lied, but then the very walls reminded them. Human history was built on enduring worse. She spoke of Earth's storms, endless wars, volcanic fury, and crushing oceans. She reminded them her people thrived where most species would never step. The instructor struck with full strength, claws blazing. Clara caught his wrist, spun with the momentum, and landed steady with only a torn sleeve. She grinned, standing proud before rows of stunned faces. Blood dripped, but her laughter filled the hall. For the first time the warrior faltered, then roared again. Pain is the lesson. Clara raised her pen skyward and shouted back that survival was the true exam, and she had already passed. Whispers filled the chamber, the word human traveling mouth to mouth with growing dread. No cadet had ever answered an instructor and lived. Yet Clara stood there, battered but unbowed, her smile shattering their traditions. What shook them most was her honesty. She admitted it hurt, but refused to let it rule her. She stood, notebook still open, pen faintly glowing from a hidden modulator she had smuggled in, and asked if the class was ready to learn what her people had always known. That defiant line would echo through the academy, whispered at every meal until it became more than rumor. Years later, when cadets marched into war and finally faced humans in battle, Clara's words returned like a haunting prophecy. Because pain was the lesson, but humans were the ones left standing. For now, silence swallowed the chamber, broken only by Clara underlining her notes and circling 2 words. Lesson complete. The stillness dragged on longer than any student could recall. The instructor's claws twitched. His muscles tense between rage and retreat. For a warlord whose power rested on dominance, even hesitation rattled the class. Cadets fidgeted, frills quivering, eyes darting nervously. Clara leaned lightly on her pen as though it were a staff. And for the first time in academy history, a student laughed at an instructor. Her laugh was not cruel but sharp, as though she had cracked the very stone face of authority itself. Instead of striking her again, the instructor lowered his claws and raised his voice to the room. Pain is the lesson, he repeated. But this time his tone was softer, almost uncertain. Clara stepped back, tapped her notebook, and asked the question no one dared voice aloud. If pain is the lesson, then what grade are we supposed to earn? A few cadets tilted their heads in confusion, while others murmured nervously. One insectoid student finally lifted a trembling limb and demanded to know how Clara had withstood blows that had dropped them countless times. The instructor snapped for silence, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Clara only shrugged and answered that humans never stop standing. That was how they survived winters, plagues, and wars that spanned generations. With a grin, she added that compared to all that, one reptile with flashy claws was nothing more than a pop quiz. Whispers erupted across the chamber. The instructor barked for silence, but it was too late. Clara had shifted the debate. It was no longer about taking the hit, but about rethinking its meaning. For the academy, pain was sacred. It molded courage, demanded loyalty, and kept order. But for Clara, it was background noise, something acknowledged but never idolized. To her, strength came not from worshipping pain but treating it as just another obstacle in a world filled with worse. The cadets exchanged looks that none of their instructors had seen before. The academy's leaders did not ignore the disturbance. That evening, Clara was summoned before the High Council in a towering hall of glowing walls, where the statues of long-dead generals glared down like silent judges. The counselors loomed above her, lit in harsh green, demanding to know why she mocked tradition. Clara stood at the center, notebook in hand, and calmly explained she hadn't mocked anything. She had simply survived what was presented. If they disliked the outcome, perhaps the problem was with the lesson, not with her. Hisses rippled through the council chamber. Yet what unsettled them most wasn't her answer but the cadets whispering in her defense. By the time she returned to her quarters, groups of students were waiting outside. Some asked her to teach them her methods. Others wanted to see if the rumors were true, that she laughed at strikes designed to break bones. Clara raised an eyebrow, held up her notebook, and told them she didn't train with fists or claws. She trained with memory. She recorded everything. Every injury, every hardship, every mistake. Pain was data, not destiny. That phrase spread like wildfire. Within weeks, Clara disrupted the academy more than any enemy raid could. During sparring drills, cadets began refusing to chant pain is the lesson, muttering Clara's version instead. Instructors noticed crude notebooks in alien hands, filled with symbols after every match. They weren't glorifying scars anymore. They were tracking progress. Furious, the staff doubled punishments and raised the difficulty of trials. Clara was singled out, forced into match after match with stronger opponents. She only smirked and kept rising. Bruises covered her, yet so did whispers. Maybe the human was right. During a massive simulation in the holographic arena, the instructor staged a battlefield of trenches and plasma fire, demanding a headlong charge. Clara's squad was expected to crumble, but instead she ordered them to scatter, to use chaos against itself, to hide, adapt, and survive. For the first time, alien cadets fought with cunning instead of blind pain. They turned the tide, cornering their rivals until the simulation froze. Enraged instructors stormed in, demanding to know how she had convinced them to abandon sacred tactics. Clara simply smiled and asked why victory itself wasn't proof of learning. Her squad stood firm beside her, silent but resolute. The council met again, but the crisis had grown. They couldn't punish Clara without risking rebellion, and they couldn't ignore her without admitting her methods worked. They tried to isolate her, banning her from leading drills, yet squads across the academy adopted her ideas anyway. Before battles, cadets whispered human sayings. Scars were no longer badges of worship but reminders to adapt. Instructors grew harsher, but cracks had opened in the foundation, and human resilience took root inside them. Clara had not only smirked and endured, she had weaponized endurance. And though the academy didn't yet realize it, the seeds of their defeat had been sown in that classroom, watered with ink and laughter, strengthened every time the human refused to fall. At last, the council's patience broke. Clara was declared not a student, but a threat, an enemy of centuries-old tradition. They ordered her immediate expulsion from the academy and exile from Vorith Prime. But instead of cheers, the chamber filled with murmurs. Whispers grew into a roar as cadets rose from their seats. Students of every species Clara had trained beside stood in defiance. They had endured drills, punishments, and humiliation all their lives, yet none had ever dared to rise against their instructors, until now. Clara's words, her scribbled notes, her laughter in the face of strikes, had already taken root. The council tried to silence the chamber, but the students refused. Clara simply raised her pen, tapped it against her notebook, and stepped forward. She told the council she would accept exile if that was their judgment, but warned them they were making a grave mistake. Pain could intimidate, pain could scar, but it could never unite. Inspiration was born from something else entirely, the will to rise again. Her voice carried across the chamber, echoing beneath the statues, echoed further still by the footsteps of cadets leaving their seats to stand beside her. 100 eyes, once skeptical, now blazed with conviction. The council watched as their academy slipped through their grasp. Within weeks, the fracture widened. Instructors doubled their efforts, striking harder, punishing longer. But the harder they pressed, the more students resisted. Humans had always been branded fragile, yet Clara's example proved otherwise. Rumors spread past the academy walls, carried home in cadets' letters. Tales of the human girl who smirked at blades became wildfire. Entire battalions across Vorith Prime began whispering that perhaps humans were not prey at all, but predators of a different sort. The council panicked. They resolved to end her influence once and for all with a final spectacle, a staged duel before the entire academy. Clara would face not a mere instructor but a council champion, a decorated veteran whose scars were paraded like trophies. The arena overflowed, every wall lined with staff and cadets. The champion entered with twin plasma blades, towering above Clara. The council thundered that this would be the ultimate lesson, that pain would crush insolence. Clara only smiled, twirling her battered pen like a blade. The duel erupted in a storm of strikes. Plasma slashed, metal hissed, sparks erupted from the floor, but Clara danced away, sliding with deceptive ease. She never met blade with blade. She let the champion tire, guiding his fury like a conductor with her pen. Cuts, burns, bruises marked her, yet each time she rose again, squaring her shoulders, smirking through the pain. The champion roared, unleashing one last strike meant to split her in half. Clara crumpled, and the crowd froze. Then slowly, staggering, she stood again, bloodied but laughing, her pen raised high. The chamber exploded. Cadets slammed their fists against the walls, chanting not the council's creed but Clara's defiance. Pain is data. The champion faltered, undone not by her strength but by the roar of those voices. Authority shattered in that instant. The academy, once a fortress of obedience, became a cradle of rebellion. Clara declared the lesson complete, not because she had triumphed in combat, but because she had shown that humans could endure anything. The champion lowered his blades in surrender, and whispers of her defiance tore through Vorith Prime. Soon those whispers reached the military. When cadets graduated into soldiers, Clara's influence surfaced in every battle. Alien ranks that had once worshipped pain now hesitated, remembering the girl who called it noise. Against human armies, hesitation was fatal. Again and again Vorith fleets broke. Soldiers stumbled as humans kept rising through wounds that should have felled them. No weapon, no scar, no strike could end them. The war was brutal, but the outcome inevitable. Human forces shattered fleets, stormed fortresses once thought impenetrable, and turned the proudest traditions of Vorith Prime against their own masters. The council knelt at last, their creed of pain reduced to rubble by the resilience they had mocked. Clara's name spread not through official records, but in the hushed retellings of soldiers who had seen her stand when no one else could. She had taken the Empire's greatest weapon and turned it into a joke. She had laughed at agony and inspired a generation to believe that survival itself was victory. In the ruins of the academy, where dueling pits once demanded blood, cadets now trained with notebooks and pens, measuring growth instead of scars. Clara eventually returned to Earth, but her legend lingered in every corner of the galaxy, carried in whispers and in smirks that mirrored her own. The Council had been right about one thing. Pain was indeed a lesson, but it was never the one they imagined. Humans had rewritten it, and in doing so they broke an empire,